Hello, I finished reading the novelization of episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and I had so much that I took away from this and I really just wanted to talk about it. We're going to start by talking about Anakin, then we'll move on to Obi-Wan, my favorite part of this discussion, and then we'll talk about the Force and more knowledge that this book gives about the inner workings of the Force. But I learned so much from reading this book. Now granted, The Revenge of the Sith, which is my entry point into the series, is so much better written. And will probably always be my favorite Star Wars novel because it was my introduction to Star Wars. It holds a special place in my heart. And while quality-wise, this book probably doesn't hold a candle to Revenge of the Sith, I learned so much about the story that I suddenly care about very, very much, and I want to talk about some of it. Starting with Anakin. So we actually begin the book with a pod race, and in the movie we do have dialogue that points us to the fact that Anakin has been racing for a long time, and the only reason Anakin lost his last fight was because Sebula, I think, he flashed him with his exhaust pipe? Well, that pod race that the movie is referencing is what this book opens up with. And it's an excellent scene because, you know, who doesn't want to watch another pod race, but also because it gives us more time to sit with Anakin and to see from him what it's like being in a pod race for someone who can use the Force. And obviously we know already that Anakin, the reason that he is the one human that can complete a pod race, or rather that can be in a pod race with all these creatures that have very different bodies that facilitate them being able to look directly behind them or, you know, have a lot faster reflexes than what humans have. The reason is because of his connection to the Force, even though he doesn't understand that. But here we're actually able to experience it with him. We see his love for pod racing despite the dangers that come with it. We see his connection to the race, his love and excitement of being able to be there, how it's something that is dangerous and scary, but also it just feels so right to him. And we also see how the Force saves his life many, many times in these races. His mechanical skills are, of course, essential. If things aren't put together perfectly, then it will be disastrous for him. But there's also implications within the book, several implications, never outright stated, but in multiple places, there's implications that the reason Anakin is such an extraordinary mechanic isn't because of boy genius, which is kind of the impression that I got when I watched the movie, but rather it's his connection to the Force, because his connection to the Force, his relationship with the Force, is described as this, as I said in my last video, as this connectivity with all things. He can reach out with the Force, and it's described in this book as a connection to the mechanics of things as well. He can feel, he can sense every bolt, every screw, every gear. He knows exactly how it should function and what it needs to function better. It not only connects him with people and with other creatures, it connects him with beings, but it also connects him with machines in a way that helps him to understand them in a way that is far beyond what a normal human would experience. But like I said, this is true for machines as well as with all living beings. It helps him to know them on an almost spiritual level that people without the Force simply don't have access to. His relationship with the Force is a connection piece, which I think is really interesting for his character. And in the books, different Jedi have different types, and Sith have different types of connection with the Force, which I'll elaborate on in a little bit. But both of the Star Wars novels that I've read so far have offered this. But speaking specifically of Anakin just now, his connection to all things is very interesting, not just for him as a mechanic or for him as a son, but it's also interesting. There's an added scene in this book that I don't think is really necessary or important, but I quite enjoyed because it's an elaboration of his connection with all things in relationship to the Sand People. There's a Tusken Raider scene in this book where he stumbles on, are they called Tusken Raiders? I'm questioning myself. I didn't write it down. Ah, shucks. Well, anyway, there's an additional scene in this book in chapter 6, if you're curious, where one of the sand people, I believe, is pinned under a boulder, if I'm remembering correctly, and Anakin can't just leave him to die alone. He's heard of the brutality of these people. He's heard of how dangerous they are, and he knows that he should steer clear of them, but he also knows that there's only one here, and it's dying. And his compassion leads him to not continuing on with what he's really supposed to be doing, but instead to stay behind, to free him, to offer him water, and to just sit with him while he recovers. They can't communicate. Well, Anakin does have C-3PO with him, so he does have a translator, and the Tusken Raider, the Sand Person, I'm actually concerned that I'm not remembering their official title correctly. The Sand Person is very aggressive toward them, not wanting to communicate, not wanting to have any sort of bond or relationship or connection. But he's also too weak to do anything, and so Anakin just sits with him. He just sits, he eats, he drinks his water, he offers water, though it's not accepted, and he just waits. Anakin does eventually fall asleep, and then he wakes up to a bunch of Tusken Raider, a bunch of sand people surrounding him, which is, of course, very not ideal situation. But what they do is they recover the body of the injured of their own, that they can clearly see that Anakin was watching over. They can see that he assisted, and so rather than attacking, they end up just backing away and leaving Anakin there. They don't attack him. They don't do anything with him. Now, again, it's not an important scene. It's not essential to the story, but it does add something for me to what the inner conflict in Anakin must have been, in that this is the one connection he's had, or rather the one experience that I'm aware of that he's had with the Sand People directly, and it was one of mercy, and it was one of attempted connection. He even had a line where he said, "I know what they're known for, but there's always two sides to one story, and I've only heard one side." And so he assumes that there might be more to them, and extends kindness because of that. And I think the fact that the next time we encounter them is, his experience with his mom, with losing his mom, the horrible situation that was, I think just adds a little bit more gravity to what that connection is for him, that he had that experience of mercy being extended from both sides, at least to an extent, and then the next time he experiences them, it's the exact opposite from both sides. Of course, Anakin's was a bit more reactionary, and theirs was just of cruelty. At least I think. I don't know. We'll find out when I get to the novelization of episode 2 if that sheds any more light on that scene. There's also a little bit more information on what really holds Anakin back from being accepted by the Jedi Council to be trained as a Jedi. I do think that the movie explains this thoroughly, but we get a little bit more, which is that Jedi are not accepted to be trained after a 6-month period, or rather, after a year, definitely. But most Jedi are identified and taken into training by 6 months, and after a year, you're already developed enough that it's just not gonna work out. The Jedi want to start training you immediately in the Jedi code, in the Jedi way. And with Anakin, he already has so much anger in him that it's too late. It's too late for the Jedi way to be able to anchor itself, to root itself in his nature, in his philosophy, in the way that he perceives and is guided in the world. And they were right. I mean, they were right. Anakin's anger, primarily his fear, is what was his undoing. Now, that's not to say that they strictly always keep by this. Obviously, the Jedi Council do decide to start training him by the end of this episode. We know that Luke gets trained, and I'm sure there were others, but these are the rationale for why Anakin was not accepted. It's not just he's too old, it's he's already too developed in a way that is not that of the Jedi. It's too late to really instill this in him. And we can see that there's already a lot of fear and a lot of anger that's driving him. His future is clouded. Okay, let's move on to Qui-Gon Jinn, because I love Qui-Gon in the movie. I think that the actor that they got did a phenomenal job with him, but I love him in the book. Qui-Gon is such a fascinating character to me. He has this belief that all forms of life are inherently valuable because of their relationship with the Force. He was sort of known for constantly picking up strays. Qui-Gon saw potential in beings, not because of their skill or their intelligence, but because of their intrinsic worth. This irritated Obi-Wan, and he regularly didn't agree with Qui-Gon in his decisions to take on his projects, as Obi-Wan put it. But he also admired Qui-Gon for his skill as a Jedi and his unshakable bravery. Qui-Gon to me comes off as an incredibly noble person. He's someone who is brave, who is incredibly skilled, who has a lot of influence, and he uses all those things for the sake of others. He is unshakable in his vision for what's right and in his belief for what his role within the Force should be, even if it puts him in direct odds with the Jedi Council. He regularly he's so similar to Anakin in my mind, not truly, but there are certain aspects of him that are so similar to Anakin in my mind, how Anakin would go against what the Order, and this is more, again, I guess this was more elaborated on in the novelization of Episode 3, but he would regularly go against the Jedi Order if it meant that he was going to protect another Jedi. So too, Obi-Wan would regularly go against what he was instructed to do by the Jedi Order if it meant that he was taking care of another living being that he believed deserved his attention and his care just as much as anything else. For both of them, this hindered their promotion within the Order. For both of them, it lowered their esteem and the Jedi Order's trust in them because they were so entrenched in their beliefs and in what they thought was the right thing. For Anakin, it was protecting those he loved. For Qui-Gon, it was protecting anyone. It's my fascination with Qui-Gon in this book and with the added lore and understanding of his character and his philosophy that inspired me to immediately pick up Master and Apprentice after finishing this book, which I'm only one chapter into Master and Apprentice, but I've started it and I'm excited to spend more time with Qui-Gon to get more elaboration on his relationship with the Force and his philosophy and his relationship with Obi-Wan. I just don't feel like we got enough, and I'm excited that I have opportunities to experience more. An aspect of Qui-Gon's connection with the Force was, again, it was explored a lot. I'm gonna try to distill it. But Qui-Gon was connected with the living Force. He was connected with the creatures in front of him now, and that was what he was invested in and what he really focused his attention on. I'll elaborate more on that in a little bit in the video. Whereas Obi-Wan was connected more to the unification of the Force, the past, the present, all things, how they're unified, how they're connected. But Qui-Gon really didn't focus so much on unification, on the past or did I say present for Obi-Wan? On the past and on the future for Obi-Wan. Anyway, sorry. Qui-Gon didn't really focus on the past and the future so much. He just was focused on the living Force right here, right in front of him. That was what he was passionate about. That was what he believed in as the most important thing. That was what drew him, or that was the piece of the Force that drew him the most. A quote from the book: Obi-Wan would see the boy and Jar Jar in the same light. Useless burdens, pointless projects, unnecessary distractions. Obi-Wan was grounded in the need to focus on the larger picture, on the unifying Force. This is a snippet from a larger quote that I'm going to have on screen later on in the video, but it gives us a kind of a brief look into the difference of the relationship that Obi-Wan versus Qui-Gon had with the Force. And between Qui-Gon's focus, his emphasis, the piece of the Force that drew him the most, and his similarities with Anakin, that he has a little bit of a rebellious nature, a little bit of a willingness Actually, there's another quote in the novel that puts it as, I'll have it on screen, something along the lines of a willingness to oppose the rules if they go against the whispers of his mind that the Force are directing him toward. And it just leads me to wonder, you know, because Obi-Wan says, I'll take him on. No, he doesn't. Qui-Gon says, I'll take him on as my apprentice. And so I'm forced to wonder, you know, like, what if he did? What if Anakin was brought up by Qui-Gon? What difference would that have made? How would Qui-Gon have instructed him on how to deal with secret issues that Anakin didn't entrust Obi-Wan with the truth of his relationship with Padme, but Obi-Wan knew. So how would Qui-Gon have responded to that very obvious thing that people closest to them were able to figure out? How would Qui-Gon have advised him when the Jedi Council told Anakin to spy on Palpatine, and that really bothered Anakin? That was something that Anakin didn't agree with and didn't want to do. What would Qui-Gon have said about that? Even though Qui-Gon also would have probably known, just like the rest of the Jedi Council did, that Palpatine wasn't to be trusted. What would Qui-Gon have said about the Jedi Order not totally trusting Anakin and not filling him in on all the information, all the things that happened in Revenge of the Sith? How would Qui-Gon have advised Anakin to deal with his anger and with his fear that ended up so dominating him that it led him down such a dark path? I don't know. Would it have been better? Would it have been worse? I don't actually know, but I can't help but wonder. The next quote I have on screen is long, but I encourage you to pause and read it because I do think that it's important, partially because of how funny I think it is that Obi-Wan just didn't like Jar Jar and didn't want him to join them, but it also really does show us a lot about Qui-Gon's nature and his beliefs. His conviction that we are responsible to act when we come upon something that's been covered. This is something that I think can be applied in many aspects of life, and this one line alone makes me wish that he had trained me. It makes me want to spend a lot more time under his counsel, to see the kind of advice that he gives, the kind of worldview that he instills in those that he takes under his wing. But there are a couple of scenes where we see Qui-Gon train or invest in counsel Anakin. There's one scene directly after the pod race that we do watch on screen in the movie where someone accuses Anakin of cheating. They say, a slave could never win a race, you must have cheated. And Anakin, there's a lot of emotions and feelings that are kind of stirring within him at this moment, but either way, he jumps the guy. He starts fighting. He starts trying to pummel him. Qui-Gon disrupts the fight. He pulls them off of each other, and I'll read you the quote. Qui-Gon studied him carefully, disappointment registering in his broad features. He fixed the young Rodian with his gaze and asked him if he still believed Anakin had cheated. The youngster, glowering at Anakin, said he did. Qui-Gon put his hand on Anakin's shoulder and steered him away from the crowd, not saying anything until they were out of hearing. "You know, Annie," he said then, his deep voice thoughtful, "fighting didn't change his opinion. The opinions of others, whether you agree with them or not, are something you have to learn to tolerate." I just can't help but wonder how Anakin would have been shaped under Qui-Gon's instruction, under his tutelage. And don't get me wrong, I love Obi-Wan. I am a massive Obi-Wan fan, and Anakin and Obi-Wan's brotherhood is the main thing that made me so attached to Revenge of the Sith, despite being dropped into the series in what would think would be a very inopportune time. So I'm not advocating for change, but I can't help but wonder, what if? One last thing I want to talk about, I think, in the Qui-Gon section is the relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. They too have a very, very close, I say they too, speaking because I just spoke of Obi-Wan and Anakin, they two have a very, very close relationship. They've trained together for a long time. Obi-Wan admires Qui-Gon, even though they have very different relationships with the Force and ideals of what should be taking up their time and attention. He admires Qui-Gon as a fighter, but also just as a person. But this book is filled with tension between the two of them, partially because of their different philosophies, and Obi-Wan, quite frankly, is sick of Qui-Gon's nonsense. Stop picking up everyone you meet, everyone that's in despair, everyone that's an underdog, everyone that's struggling at all. Pick them up, get distracted, stop, don't fulfill your missions fast enough because you're all the time doing whatever. Just focus, man. Like, there's that side of it, but Far more so, it's about Anakin. Obi-Wan feels really slighted in this book by Qui-Gon picking up Anakin, really believing in his very important role, which Obi-Wan does acknowledge that it makes sense, but also he feels replaced. He feels shoved aside. I'll take him on as my apprentice. Obi-Wan's ready. And he really does believe that he's ready, but also it's hurtful to see what looks like his replacement just being brought in right before his eyes. He's protective over Qui-Gon and how his constant assertions of his own ideals hurts his relationship with his position in the council, which is mentioned in the movie, just, you know, elaborated on here. There's that side of it, the protectiveness, but there's also just the hurt feelings and the divide that's being widened between them each time Qui-Gon takes up for Anakin. There's tension between the two of them throughout the entire book, and that tension does finally get resolved at the end of the book, right before the fight with the Darth Maul. It's cathartic. I'm glad that they actually had a conversation and were able to resolve things, but it also hurts that they spent all this time divided only to come together right before they're divided permanently. Really, I think that Qui-Gon is such a massive part of the driving force of this story. Obviously, there are many characters that push forward the politics and the battle and the defense of the story, but as far as the pieces of the story that we primarily follow, the driving force, the decisions that are made that move the story, that is our main emphasis, that we're watching. And the sole reason Anakin is even shepherded into this story that is ultimately his, you know, the prequels are ultimately his story. Qui-Gon is the reason that he's even shepherded into it, the reason that his story even happens. So with him being such a massive, important aspect of episode 1, I consider him to be the driving force and the main lead until he dies, and then episode 2 is when Anakin steps forward and becomes the driving force of his prequel series. With him being so important, I do wish that the movies had explored that tension between these two a little bit more, because I do think that it deepens both of their characters quite a bit. But what are you gonna do? Next, we're gonna talk about the Force, but I have to go pick up my kids from school now, so I'll probably record the rest of this video tomorrow. The Force, the Jedi, the Sith, the midi-chlorians, not only in how it affects Anakin as a pod racer or as a mechanic, but really how it affects his perception and connection with the world at large. When I watched the movie, I was a bit confused about midi-chlorians. I mean, they do explain it to an extent. Obviously, we know that Anakin has a higher amount of midi-chlorians than anyone else. And then we do have the scene where Qui-Gon explains to him that we are life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without the midi-chlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force. Our midi-chlorians continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. When you learn to quiet your mind, you will hear them speaking to you. Anyway, there was an additional scene during the council meeting when Qui-Gon is presenting Anakin as the potential chosen one. There's a little bit of extra dialogue in that scene as well, where Qui-Gon presents that it was possible that he was conceived by midi-chlorians. And then there's a short paragraph that expands on that a little bit. It says, Qui-Gon Jinn was suggesting the impossible, that the boy was conceived not by human contact, but by the essence of all life, by the connectors of the Force itself, the midi-chlorians. Comprising collective consciousness and intelligence, the midi-chlorians formed the link between everything living and the Force. So the midi-chlorians, my understanding up to this point, is that the midi-chlorians are, and you can infer this from what's said in the movie as well, the midi-chlorians are what connects us to the Force. It says it's comprising collective consciousness and intelligence. So I suppose the collective consciousness, because in the Revenge of the Sith book, we learn that once someone dies, they become one with the Force. The impression that I got was something along the lines of they are released to the Force and they still exist within the Force. And so losing someone, the death of someone, in a sense, it is lost, but in a sense, it's also not, because you're still connected to them simply by being connected to the Force, because you're connected to all things in that way. So that's the way I'm perceiving the use of collective consciousness here. The connection, let me read that again, comprising collective consciousness and intelligence. So I would interpret this as the collective consciousness, the collective universe and everything that's in it connects to human intelligence through the midichlorians. That's the connecting, like the midichlorians of all things and our human understanding. Now, Qui-Gon does say that they're microscopic life forms, so the midichlorians wouldn't be some sort of just like nebulous thing, but that this is actually life forms that are connecting with life forms in the wider, broader universe. And this connection between the life forms that live inside of us and the life forms in the universe proper, their connection then also connects to our intelligence, and we can hear the midichlorians speaking to us. I'm speaking as if I'm a Jedi now. They can hear the midichlorians speaking to them, and that connects them to the will of the Force. I'm sure there's still a lot that I don't understand, but this is my best attempt with the information that I have at the moment. It makes sense in my brain. It makes sense in my mind, in this fictional world, in this fictional reality that has been created, the mechanics of how the spiritual and the physical connect and communicate works. So Anakin having a much higher midichlorian count than anyone before him, does that mean that he understood the will of the Force better than anyone else? Probably not, because he really didn't listen to the will of the Force at all. He only listened to himself. But that's an interesting concept too, that it doesn't matter how high your midichlorian count is, if you're only going to listen to your own will, your own desires, your own passions, then you're not going to follow the will of the Force. You're going to follow your own will, your own desire, rather than submitting to the will of the Force, rather than trusting this greater being or greater substance that that has a wider connection to all things and understanding of all things, rather than submitting yourself to it. Instead, one like Anakin or like Palpatine or any Sith will try to make the Force wrap around them, will try to move the Force according to their own will and desires. But it is interesting to think that someone who has a stronger potential to connection to the Force would still have that free will to be deterred. Is it because he wasn't trained up from the age of 6 months plus, or six months to a year? Is it because he started so late and there was already so much anger and fear embedded in him? I don't know. I don't know. I still have so many questions. But that's good. Like, it's speculative questions. It's things that I can turn over in my mind and try to pick up clues on and try to determine for myself. The book also expanded somewhat on the Force itself and on the Jedi relationship with the Force from the time that they first were able to intuit what the Force was, their pursuit to understand it, and then eventually their decision to not remain secluded but instead try to help the wider world. This concept that it required service to the greater community and implementation of a system of laws that would guarantee equal justice for all. That was the Jedi kind of understanding and rationale for creating the Jedi Council. And there's also several implications that you can sense many different things in the Force and choose to center your focus on different aspects. Which aspect you focus on is significant to where it ends up leading you. Qui-Gon even acknowledges the imbalance in himself. He's so focused on the life force, which causes him to not have enough focus on the unifying force. He's so focused on the creatures here and now that he doesn't give attention to the past or the future. But it's clear that different Jedi are drawn and connected to different aspects of the Force, and that shapes them in subtle but large ways. And we also get more on the Sith, that they come into being just because of one rogue Jedi Knight that believed that power denied was power wanted. And the real power of the Force lie not in the light, but in the dark. They built their cult in opposition to the Jedi. They didn't want to serve, they wanted to dominate. But in the end, the Sith destroyed themselves. Their beliefs led them to turn on their leader and then on each other until there were none but one left. Darth Bane. and he reinvented the order and the system of only 2 Sith at a time. And it makes me really want to read the Darth Bane series soon, but I have so many Star Wars books that I want to read. It's very overwhelming. There were other extras that the book provided as well, extra scenes or information. Shmi was one that really stood out to me in the book because she's already such an extraordinary mom, but we got a few extra lines from her that just really hit my mom heart pretty hard. But before I conclude this video just talking about the extra stuff that I loved in the book, I also want to mention that even though I so enjoyed getting all this the expansion, I enjoyed getting a story expanded on. There are certain things that can never be replicated or compared in book form. And that's the action. I loved reading about the pod races. I so enjoyed being in Anakin's head and getting a closer, more intimate look of what it felt like to be pod racing as a child that doesn't even understand that he's tapping into the Force. That sort of the language that was used by him to just speak of his instinct as he thought it was. But also the connection and the passion that came with that. But nothing can compare to watching it happen in the movie. I guess it's just a matter of different mediums having different strengths and both being well worth experiencing because of the differences that they provide. Much the same, big fan of Darth Maul movie and book, but nothing can compare to watching Darth Maul fight. I'm such a fan of that actor. I mean, I don't know his name, I don't know anything else he's performed in, but just, you know, the role he played here, not just because his choreography is so clean, he's just so impressive to watch. Not a soft stance, not a sloppy movement. Everything is so precise and pristine and meticulous. Oh, it's so good. But also just his presence, the way he stalks back and forth when Obi-Wan kneels down to meditate while he's waiting for the shields to come back up, to really collect himself and become one with the Force so that he can continue to fight Darth Maul. And the whole time Darth Maul prods back and forth like a predator waiting for his prey. When he tragically kills, he doesn't even stop to watch him fall. He doesn't even stay. He doesn't keep his eyes on. He doesn't care to watch his enemy drop. He strikes him and then immediately spins around and gets that predator gaze right on Obi-Wan. He doesn't care to revel in what he's just done. He's just ready for the next battle. He's just ready to set eyes on the next one that he'll take down. That presence can't be matched in book form. I'm a book reader through and through. I will always choose the book over the movie. If there's a movie that I happen to watch and love, I will always pick up the book that it was inspired from or that was created afterward in this case. Or at the same time, I think. I think it was the same time. It doesn't matter. I will always choose the book. But for Darth Maul, I will always choose the movie. That's all I have for you for this probably too long video talking about the novelization of episode 1. I hope it interested you in some way. Please feel free to chat with me more in the comments. I would love to continue chatting. I'll see you again soon. Bye.